Good morning, and thank you for joining us today for the ABCs of PFAS and what local government officials need to know. We've put together a 60 to 75-minute presentation here today, and I am very grateful for all of you for taking some time to join us from your busy schedules to participate in this very important webinar discussing PFAS, water contamination, environmental contamination, and what is relevant to local governments. My name is Stephen Aquario. I'm the executive director of the New York State Association of Counties, and I'd like to thank our sponsor today, Labella Associates. Labella has been at the forefront of investigating and remediating PFAS across the state and other parts of the country, working with the Department of Environmental Conservation, local government, and clients to evaluate and, if necessary, remediate sites with PFAS impacts. Labella has also assisted clients with addressing PFAS in drinking water, designing and installing PFAS treatment for small-scale residential POETs, as well as large-scale municipal drinking water treatment distribution systems. We're very appreciative of their support. We have a brief 1-minute, 60-second video from our sponsor, Jeanette.
Labella Associates has worked with a number of our municipal clients to help them identify and remove perfluoroalkyl contaminated compounds from their drinking water source. Perfluoroalkyl compounds are commonly referred to as PFAs or PFAS. They're a very long molecular chain carbon and fluoride compound that stays in the environment for a very long time. Labella has partnered with a number of municipalities to provide rapid response and design and construct treatment systems to help them identify and remove PFAS contamination from their drinking water. Labella has the experience, resources, and knowledge to help any municipality dealing with PFAS contamination issues. Feel free to give us a call and we'll help you navigate through these complex decisions.
Again, thank you to our sponsor, Labella Associates. Very pleased today to have a very fine panel of speakers that are with us. I'm just going to introduce all of them at once, and then we'll get right into it. Robert Hayes is the Director of Clean Water for EANY, Environmental Associates of New York, Advocates of New York, and Dharma Santos Santiago, Clean Water Associate for EANY, Environmental Advocates of New York. Both are with environmental advocates, and both are strong leaders in addressing water pollution, fracking waste, hazardous chemicals, working very closely with environmental advocate New York partners, building coalitions all across the state and all across the nation, and are true leaders driving change in the state of New York. Very grateful for Robert and Dharma with us. Next up will be Gary Ginsberg and Roger Sokol from the Department of Health, Centers for Environmental Health. Very pleased to have these two national experts with us here today. And then Martin Brand, the Deputy Commissioner of Office of Remediation and Materials Management, again, a national expert, a state treasurer right here from the state of New York, sharing the expertise and knowledge from the state's Department of Environmental Conservation. Finally, Charles Guter from the TRC's company will offer engineering solutions and share his working knowledge and experiences with PFAS remediation. Very pleased to have all of them with us here today. And we'll start off right now, after which these presentations at the end, you'll be able to type in questions throughout the program. Please feel free to use your chat box and we'll get to these questions at the end, but we encourage folks to ask lots of questions. This is a very timely webinar talking about a very serious environmental contaminant. I had the pleasure of representing local governments across the United States at a US EPA summit in 2019 in Washington, D.C., along with Martin Hammond, was with us, Martin Brand, excuse me, was with us and others from the Department of Health at this historic US EPA summit. And I've been working on this issue for about 5 years now. So I'm very confident that the presentation you're going to hear today will be worth your time. And without further ado, let's go right to Robert Hayes and Dharma Santos Santiago. Thank you very much.
Well, good morning, everyone. Can you hear us? All right, wonderful. And are we waiting for a screen share on Jeanette's end?
Yes, just give us one moment, please, and we will pull up that slide deck.
Sounds great.
We are having a little bit of a technical difficulty here. If you wouldn't mind just beginning your remarks, we will pull up the PowerPoint as soon as we are able to.
Rob,
Sure.
maybe you could talk a little bit about Environmental Advocates New York, what you do and how you interact with local government and help local government and protect the environment.
Absolutely, happy to start with that. And so good morning again, everyone. My name is Rob Hayes. I'm the Director of Clean Water at Environmental Advocates NY. EANY is a statewide nonprofit advocacy organization. Most of our staff is based in Albany, and our real mission is to enact policies at the state level to protect public health and further environmental justice. And in doing so, we often partner with folks across the state, from grassroots community organizations to local elected officials, to help bring their voices to Albany so that state level decision makers know what policies are really needed to keep our drinking water clean, keep our air clean, and make sure that everyone has access to healthy communities. And I see that the slides are now up, which is fantastic. So I'll actually probably turn it in just a second to my colleague Dharma. But yes, really want to thank NYSAC for inviting us to speak on this really critical topic today. You know, PFAS is one of the major issues that we work on in the drinking water space, and we're really excited to hear everyone else's presentations as well. So with that, Dharma will be kicking off our presentation and turning it back to me, and I'll leave it to you then, Dharma.
Folks hear me? I think
I can
so.
now, yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Rob. I appreciate it. And as was mentioned earlier in the introductions, my name is Dharma. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Clean Water Associate with Environmental Advocates New York. Super excited to be here today. So to kind of kick off this webinar on, the ABCs of PFAS, we kind of set up a little bit of a foundation to get everyone on the same page about what PFAS are and how they interact in the environment and interact with humans in our communities as well. So PFAS stands for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, and it is a class of chemicals used in industry and manufacturing, not only in the US, but worldwide, for their waterproof and flame retardant properties. So PFAS is in many products, consumer products. You can find them in your clothes, like on rain jackets, non-stick cookware, plastic packaging, anything that would need to be waterproof or flame retardant usually has some PFAS chemical in there. And if you've seen PFAS in headlines and news articles recently, they're commonly known as forever chemicals because they persist in the environment for long periods of time and also accumulate in the human body. Because of their waterproof and flame retardant properties, they're meant to withstand elements of nature like water and fire. So they're built to last a really long time and to not break down. And this family is composed of over 9,000 chemicals. Small tweaks in the chemical composition create new PFAS chemicals that are released into the environment every year from various companies and industries. And along with their persistence in the environment and how they accumulate in the human body, they're also highly mobile in water. So they travel extremely long distances and they don't break down as they're traveling, which is an important characteristic as we've seen increasing amounts of PFAS contamination in our water bodies and eventually making their way into our drinking water. And PFAS is linked to a slew of harmful health effects. This is a very small list that's here on this slide, but it includes, but definitely not limited to, kidney cancer, testicular cancer, low birth rate, weight, high cholesterol, decreased vaccine response, preeclampsia, and much, much more. And scientists suspect that as we're exposed to multiple PFAS chemicals, there's also a risk for these health effects to amplify. So it's super important that we really engage proactively in regulating and monitoring these chemicals. So as I mentioned earlier, PFAS is everywhere, basically. But the most common way to be exposed to PFAS is in our drinking water. And in this diagram on the screen, there's multiple sources of this PFAS contamination making its way into our water bodies, and much more that aren't described in this diagram. But we can see that leaching from products that contain PFAS in landfills can make its way into our drinking water, wastewater that contains PFAS, PFAS firefighting foam from military bases and airports can also be discharged or leaked into the environment, manufacturing emissions that contain PFAS, and the application of biosolids, things like pesticides and other similar uses that contain PFAS all culminate in our water bodies and travel downstream into our drinking water. And like I mentioned previously, because they are so highly mobile and so persistent, they can accumulate in our drinking water, and if they're not filtered and treated, accumulate in our bodies thereafter. So to reiterate, drinking water is definitely the most common exposure pathway, and New York has definitely taken strides to address this common exposure pathway that Rob will jump into in a second.
Great, wonderful. Thanks, Dharma. So now that Dharma has gone over a bit of kind of what PFAS are and why they are so dangerous, we want to talk a little bit about what actions the state legislature and Governor Cuomo have been taking recently to protect public health from this class of chemicals. And I should start out by saying that action to address PFAS in New York, is relatively recent, within the last 5 or 6 years. This issue really came to the forefront in New York after the water crisis in Hoosick Falls, New York, which first came to light back in 2015. Many of you probably know this story, very small village about an hour north of Albany, who because of a plastics manufacturing plant that was using PFOA, discharging it into their groundwater, residents were exposed to extremely high levels of one PFAS chemical, PFOA, for decades, and it led to incredibly harmful health effects in that village. So after that crisis came to light, there was a lot more kind of public attention on this issue and interest in addressing it and make sure that PFAS wasn't posing a danger to our communities. So the first way that New York has been taking action against these chemicals is to start to ban them in consumer products. And this is a great place to start because the best way to prevent harm from PFAS is to prevent them from getting into our environment in the first place. And this means eliminating them at the source, getting them out of our products so they can't make their way into our soil and water and other media where then we would be exposed to them. So in the last several years, the state legislature has passed and the governor has signed bans on PFAS in firefighting foam, which has been a huge source of PFAS water contamination. I think that ban is set to go into effect sometime next year. And in food packaging as well, to be banned along a similar time frame. A lot of the popcorn bags or kind of food packaging from fast food restaurants might have these chemicals in them to prevent grease from kind of transferring from the food to your, outside the packaging. But what science has shown is that is actually quite dangerous, and those chemicals can migrate from those packages into the human body. So great action from New York in terms of that. There's also a bill currently before the governor that would further ban PFAS in items like furniture and mattresses and certain electronics. And that's currently, I think, before the governor, and he'll make a decision whether to sign or veto sometime this year. The other big action that's been taken in New York, which I know we'll be talking a lot about today, are new maximum contaminant levels for two PFAS chemicals, PFOA and PFOS. And each of those now have an MCL of 10 parts per trillion, which the State Department of Health finalized in August of 2020. And these new standards, as many of you probably already know, will require water systems to test for PFOA and PFOS and to take action to remediate their drinking water if one or both of those standards are exceeded. And this will likely lead to the installation of a lot of new treatment technology across the state, which I think you'll probably be hearing more about as well from some of the other presenters. These standards are a huge, huge deal. They are the result of years of work from communities that have been impacted by PFAS contaminated drinking water, like Hoosick Falls, like other places like Newburgh and communities on Long Island. They are some of the lowest in the nation. We're kind of just finishing up the first year of testing for these chemicals, and it'll be really important to see kind of where we're seeing contamination across the state after this testing, and where cleanup is going to have to happen going forward. The other kind of final thing to note on the MCLs before turning to that last bullet point is that PFOA and PFOS are just the tip of the iceberg here. Dharma was talking about the fact that this is a class of chemicals that we're talking about, many of which have been linked to similar health effects, harmful health effects. And we will likely see a need to go beyond just PFOA and PFOS in New York moving forward. And we'll get into some of that a little later in the presentation. And finally, there's been some action to deal with the issue of PFAS waste. And a law that was recently passed and signed by the governor to prevent the incineration of PFAS firefighting foam in Cohoes, New York, where there was an incineration facility that had been collecting firefighting foam from the Department of Defense and incinerating it. The problem here is that, as you heard earlier, there's a reason PFAS are called forever chemicals. They are incredibly resistant to breaking down, and there's evidence out there that these chemicals do not fully degrade during the incineration process. And may end up just being spewed back out into our air, which lands up in our soil and our water. And suddenly we've accomplished nothing more than just, getting these chemicals back into our environment when we were trying to take them out of it. So good action there in Cohoes. It was great to see the governor's administration recognize the danger of PFAS incineration. And I think there'll be a lot more needed to ensure statewide disposal going forward. So if we go to the next slide, please. So EANY has been doing a lot of work over the last year, starting to watchdog the implementation of New York's new drinking water standards for PFOA and PFOS. As I mentioned, we've been deeply involved in communities like Hoosick Falls and Newburgh, and now connecting with new communities in places like Rockland County and the Finger Lakes, who have discovered new PFAS contamination. And in working with those residents, there's been a lot of takeaways about how to ensure that we are building public trust in drinking water through this process. Because this process is a lot more than just getting treatment technology installed, as important as that is. Residents really desire a transparent and accountable process as this is happening, to engage them, to have their questions answered, to hear feedback from them, to inform them about progress. Residents should be seen as a really essential partner in the effort to clean up drinking water. That's how public trust in water is built and maintained. And there are other kind of things to keep in mind as well with that transparent and accountable process. How transparent is the testing data that's happening? Do residents have easy access to that online? Is the full suite of PFAS being tested for in drinking water that we can currently detect with the available testing methods? Those are really key as well to making sure that New Yorkers fully know what's in their water. And finally, there are issues around answering just the basic questions that residents have about is my water safe to drink, and how at risk am I from harmful health effects? And there can be ways that the state can provide health resources like blood testing or information to healthcare providers that will help residents navigate those really difficult questions as to how this water contamination might be impacting the health of themselves or their families. Because remember, even though these MCLs are new in New York, that doesn't mean that the contamination in our water is new. This is contamination that has likely been there for decades, has been exposing people to these chemicals for decades, and that need to be addressed as soon as possible. And this then gets to the importance of a really swift and thorough cleanup, recognizing how dangerous these chemicals are and the need to install treatment as soon as possible is so critical. And in making sure that it's a very thorough cleanup too. Are we going to be removing all of the PFAS that might be in drinking water with these filters that are installed? Will all wells that are contaminated by PFAS be cleaned up? We would hope so, but those are very important questions as we get to the implementation phase about how filters are installed and maintained and operated that will make sure that we're getting all of the PFAS out of drinking water going forward. So we can go to the next slide then. So now that we've kind of talked about kind of where New York has been, where it is currently on PFAS, where should we be going in the future? Because there's a lot more to do to address PFAS in our environment. This is an incredibly complex and multifaceted problem, and it's going to require a number of policy solutions to fully protect public health in New York. And the first place that we really need to go is we need to be regulating PFAS as a class in drinking water. There is likely to be a lot of contamination that is detected through the new MCLs for PFOA and PFOS, other PFAS chemicals that are picked up through that testing that won't be remediated because there is no formal standard for those chemicals currently in New York. That's a problem. We're going to have to address it going forward because, as Dharma said earlier, many of those other PFAS are now also being linked to the same harmful health effects as PFOA and PFOS. There's a lot of ways to do kind of a class-based drinking water standard, but that's certainly the direction that we need to be moving going forward. And a good first step to do that would be for the governor to sign a recently passed bill on this topic, listed there in step number 2. The state legislature just passed legislation, which part of it would require testing by all water utilities in the state for all of the other PFAS that we can currently detect in drinking water, all 27 of them. And that luckily, through an original law that was passed back in 2017, would also make funding available to any communities that might face kind of financial burdens of doing that testing. Knowing where contamination is, how much contamination is out there, is going to be really critical to inform those next steps of where does cleanup need to happen, what stronger standards need to be put in place. Knowing what's in our water is the first step to do that. The third point then is to increase funding to help communities install new treatment technologies and get these chemicals out of their drinking water. There are going to be many situations where a polluter might not be identifiable or where it'll take a really long time to hold that polluter accountable. And we've been really grateful that over the last several years, New York State has made funding available through the Clean Water Infrastructure Act, specifically through a program called the Water Infrastructure Improvement Act, to help communities install treatment technology and make sure costs are not being passed on to ratepayers and drastically increase their water rates. But as we know, this is a huge problem. A lot more funding is going to be needed going forward. In point number 4, this is getting back to that idea of continuing to ban PFAS in non-essential products to prevent them from getting into our environment. We were talking earlier about the good steps that New York has taken on that front, but there's a lot more products out there that we're going to need to address. And finally, we're going to have to ensure the safe disposal of PFAS waste. There is currently not a framework for dealing with PFAS waste in the state. No reporting requirements, no disposal requirements. It's a really, really tricky issue, but we have to make sure that this waste is not being incinerated, that as much as possible, we are not sending it to normal municipal landfills where it might then leach back out into our environment. Making sure that we're safely and properly disposing of it is going to be really critical to prevent more water contamination going forward. So thanks so much for listening. Hope this was a really good background on PFAS and sets the stage for some of these future presentations. And I'll turn it now back to Stephen for the next speaker.
Robert and Dharma, thank you very much for your presentation, but more important, Rob, thank you so much for your environmental advocacy and partnership with New York's local governments. And speaking of partnership, I would like to commend and thank the Department of Health, Gary Ginsberg and Roger Sokol, for their work at the department's Center for Environmental Health, a center which administers and coordinates water supply protection, radiation protection, food protection, contamination, site investigations, and toxic substance and risk assessments. I can't thank you enough for the great work that you do, the nationally recognized work, and thank our governor as well, Andrew Cuomo, for making such a concerted effort to protect our drinking water. New York is way ahead of the nation, thanks in large part to these two gentlemen and of course to our governor. Gary, we'll go to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you, Alexandra, for inviting New York State DOH onto this call. Just a quick sound check. Stephen, am I sounding okay at this point?
Yes, we can hear you fine. Thank you.
Okay, great. Yeah, and as previous speakers have said, you know, the effort on PFAS in public drinking water is really something that has to be well orchestrated amongst all the stakeholders involved. I know that part of what you wanted us to address is the various roles, and I'll touch on that in one of my next slides. But why don't we just start with the background, as has already been discussed. And by the way, Roger, thanks for joining us, and Dr. Sokol will help me answer questions when we get into the Q&A. But, you know, PFAS has been recognized as a drinking water issue now for at least half a dozen years in New York State. And we were able, through a process involving the Drinking Water Quality Council, which is a bullet point a little bit below, to adopt new drinking water standards in August 2020. That really was set up by the Clean Water Infrastructure Act of 2017, which gave New York State the funding and the authority to work very hard on emerging contaminants, the PFAS compounds, PFOA, PFOS, and also an additional emerging contaminant, 1,4-dioxane, which we were able to promulgate regulations for public water in August 2020. So the maximum contaminant levels importantly set enforceable limits for contaminant levels, which means that when they are found, we can enforce a standard against which the water operators, whether they're municipalities or private water companies, large or small, need to comply with according to compliance timetables. So that gives us the authority. And again, the Drinking Water Quality Council process was set up as well in the 2017 legislation to be an advisory role of water quality experts and health scientists, engineers, that including DEC, New York State DEC on the panel, as well as DOH, both commissioners on the Drinking Water Quality Council, to really bring the best minds to bear on how to prioritize which chemicals to address in drinking water, and then start targeting the specific criteria. And the MCLs consider both health-based and risk management factors. So if we can go to the next slide. You know, we know that we've targeted PFOA, which is an 8-carbon octanoic acid, and PFOS, which is an 8-carbon sulfonate. So I know that the chemistry is very involved with the PFAS compounds, but how did we pick those two in particular? Well, the federal role here did start kicking it off in terms of a requirement back in 2013 to 2015 for all the larger public supplies in New York State. Again, this was a federal EPA requirement to get occurrence data on whether or not we're seeing these chemicals show up in public supplies. And that was for 6 of the PFAS compounds PFOA and PFOS occurred with greatest frequency across supplies across the country, really, and in New York State. And it's been increasingly recognized. Again, they're emerging contaminants, not necessarily emerging in terms of new exposure, but emerging in terms of new information. And we're increasingly understanding some of the health effects. And so PFOA and PFOS, again, have been prioritized as sort of the prototypical PFAS with the longest half-lives, or among the longest half-lives. So in other words, longest residence time in the body, the best known health effects, and the highest occurrence rates. And so they were the ones that were naturally targeted in New York State by the Drinking Water Quality Council, as well as by the enabling legislation to tackle first. Regulating the contaminant, the third bullet here, must provide meaningful opportunity to have for exposure reduction, health risk reduction. So in other words, if it occurs in 1 out of a million water supplies, probably not going to be a big priority for them all to test for. But if it occurs 10, 20, some relatively high percentage of the time, yes, then it's important for not only the larger supplies, which were preemptively tested for in that first round of occurrence data, but for everybody in New York State with the MCL enactment to be required to test. So that's one of the things that our 2020 regulation did, was require testing across the board, requiring that, as well as mitigation across the board if you exceed our criteria. And I'll talk in a minute now about those criteria. And also, the last bullet here, it must be feasible to detect the contaminants in water. It must be feasible to treat the water, and there must be other feasibility considerations taken into account that the Drinking Water Quality Council, when they made their recommendations on what the MCL's maximum contaminant levels in New York State should be, they taking all of the health basis and the feasibility basis into account when recommending the levels. Okay, next slide. So, this again just summarizes some of what I said, but on the health basis side, the levels are set in mind the most sensitive health effect levels seen in the most sensitive species, including cancer effects, non-cancer effects, considering the human exposure side of it, considering, so in other words, how much exposure are vulnerable humans exposed to in terms of early life stages of potential risk. Well, then we take into account the rate of water intake per body weight in those life stages. The cross-species extrapolation, a lot of the data comes from animals. How do we extrapolate that to human? We use very conservative methods as well to derive health protective drinking water concentrations for PFOA, PFOS, and then we presented a range of information and a range of options to the Drinking Water Quality Council, which they took into account with risk management decisions about levels of detectability, treatment options and ability, and consistent with the MCL setting, the level of conservatism and health protectiveness across the board with other MCLs set in New York State and by the federal agencies, trying to be, as protective as possible, keeping the health basis clearly in mind as these levels get set. Next slide. As has been talked about previously on today's webinar, the pathways to drinking water and to humans is varied and can even include some air pathways, direct exposure from consumer goods, and a variety of pathways to groundwater. And I think the point, one of the take homes from this slide is that there has been progress made both in New York State and across the country on all of these pathways, especially for the longest lasting, longer chain PFAS compounds, PFOA, PFOS included amongst them, so that the levels in blood, and there is biomonitoring going on for these compounds across the country through the federal government's role. And federal government's role is not just on, this preliminary testing, but there's also a national toxicology program that's still doing a lot of health effects research on not just PFOA and PFOS as the prototypes, but across a range of additional emerging contaminant PFAS compounds, as well as looking at occurrence data across the country. And the Federal Office of Drinking Water in EPA has made a regulatory determination that they will develop MCLs, national standards for PFOA and PFOS, and perhaps additional PFAS compounds going forward in the coming years. And that is, a process that they're undertaking now, as we understand it. But New York State's been ahead of the curve. We're in the vacuum that has been left by EPA not acting up until 2018, 2019, 2020. We in New York State have rolled up our sleeves, worked with the Drinking Water Quality Council, and made sure that our water supplies are being tested, are being regulated, at least for the best known chemicals within this class. And the levels have been coming down nationally since the problem of PFAS in consumer products, in the environment, in human blood has been recognized over the last, say, 10 years, and biomonitoring has been an ongoing project nationally. We are seeing the levels coming down, and we feel that our drinking water criteria and water supply by water supply mitigation will assist the lowering of these levels to really minimal levels going forward. It's sort of like blood lead and other problems where there's been a legacy exposure, and we're working to decrease the levels in the environment, the levels in water, as well as the levels in any part of the human ecosphere. Okay, continuing on. The health protectiveness concept here is that we're setting the MCL at a level well below levels that are known to cause health effects in humans and in animals. So there's this margin of protection, we call it. So the MCL is not a bright line. In other words, a common misnomer is if the MCL is 10 parts per trillion, that if you're exposed to 11 parts per trillion, you're suddenly in a clear red zone health effect level, and that's not true. It's really more of a water quality standard that we know if your supply is above 10 parts per trillion, you can be doing better, you should be doing better, you will be doing better to meet the criteria and meet the water quality objectives across all of New York State for these contaminants. Next slide. So public supplies were required to begin monitoring within 60 days of the promulgation of these MCLs. Again, that was back in August of 2020. Quarterly monitoring thereafter, phased in based upon system size. And, the smaller bullets on this slide give you an idea of how our water supplies in New York State are broken down according out across the counties. Systems with 10,000 or more are considered the largest systems. They were required to start testing first. That was, I believe, by October of 2020. And then the intermediate-sized systems, as you can see on the slide, and then the smaller systems, less than 3,300 hookups or connections had to begin within 6 months of adoption. So where we are now is that we're through round one for all of the supplies, and we are getting through round two for many of the supplies, moving through the intermediate and smaller supplies now for round two. And one important implementation aspect of our regulation is that if you did detect any PFAS compound in round one, and most supplies were just testing for PFOA and PFOS in round one, those being used oftentimes the leading indicator PFAS compounds if there is a PFAS problem in your supply. If you did detect even sub-MCL levels in round one, you have to test for the entire suite that the method you're using can report. So these days, that's often about 20 compounds, PFAS compounds. So by the end of round two, for many supplies in New York State, they will be now reporting out not just on the 2 compounds that are regulated and we have MCLs for, but for an additional list of 5 to 20 compounds, depending upon the exact method that is being used by the supply. So we feel that by the end of this summer, going into early fall, we'll have a much better handle on those additional emerging PFAS compounds. And again, I use the word emerging in quotes because, you know, we know that they've probably been there a long time, but our knowledge of them in terms of occurrence, in terms of toxicology, is still very much emerging. And then the other part that I wanted to just briefly touch on is the local health department role in all of this, that we at the state level can't do this without a huge amount of coordination and cooperation with all the local health districts around New York State. And that is to make sure that this monitoring timetable is adhered to by the water systems in their districts, that the data are come into local health and are reported into our statewide database called CIDWIS, which each local health department has to do, and then New York State Health Department, our Bureau of Water Supply Protection, checks on the accuracy of all that data, where there are exceedances. If we can go to the next slide, in terms of violations and how they're flagged. It's defined as a detection above the MCL based upon not just one sample, but there has to be then an immediate follow-up sample to confirm the exceedance. We've found many cases where, you know, the follow-up sample didn't quite bear out what was the suspicion, but it is the initial and the confirming sample, and maybe a third sample if you know there needs to be a resolution of any differences. But it's that testing that then leads to a violation that the local health department notifies the operator that you've got a violation, and that triggers notification by the water supply to its consumers, so all the connections within 30 days that says that now we are in, as our water company, we're in violation and we're coming within the state regulation for compliance. Compliance schedule is established to meet the MCL and develop a compliance timetable as quickly as possible. It's worked out with the local health department and with oversight by New York State Health Department. And here at the bottom are some of the options for treating the water or finding an alternative source. You know, treatment is great. Granular activated carbon works pretty well for PFOA, PFOS, and many of its cousins. However, that does have operation and maintenance costs and ongoing monitoring issues. And if an alternative source can be developed, either through an interconnection with another supply or through finding another major well that's not affected, that can sometimes be the best long-term solution. Next. And so, as I briefly mentioned, the enforcement process involves very much local health department directly working with the public water supply, the notice of violation, the public notification, and compliance timelines, all going through the local health department and data coded into what I said before, CIDWIS, Safe Drinking Water Information System, which is really our cornerstone database to understand the compliance with the monitoring program, and then the follow-up, the flagging of violations and the follow-up on those violations. Okay, next step. So I think the next really, I'm just about done, is funding opportunities. Certainly, you know, we have had funding that has been made available through the New York State Legislature for, you know, Department of Health working with the Environmental Facilities Corporation, or EFC, to fund PFAS mitigation in public water supplies across New York State as these are detected. It's through the Water Infrastructure Improvement Act funding grant, which provides grant awards for critical infrastructure improvement. It doesn't have to be about emerging contaminants or MCL violations. It could be any critical infrastructure, perhaps involving algal blooms or other just aging infrastructure needs. But so there's WIA, that has been a source of funds, as well as intermunicipal water infrastructure grants, as well as the Drinking Water State Revolving Loan Fund. And DOH will assist water operators look at what the funding opportunities are, so that as the engineering plans are coming along, the compliance plans are coming along, also the funding mechanisms are, DOH helps, the operators figure out how to apply, when to apply, and, get into that cycle. So that, again, as Rob Hayes mentioned, it's not all borne by the consumer. All right, I think that's my last overview slide. If we can just go to the last slide. I think that's for more information on our drinking water program and on PFAS in particular, both at the state level and also at the federal level. And we do have helplines for quick Q&A to assist communities when they find out that, oh, there's an MTL violation within a 30-day notification. What does it mean for us? Should we be concerned personally? Is biomonitoring available? All those kinds of questions. We can help the community answer those questions. And that's what Roger and I are here for as well, to help answer NISAC's questions. So I'll stop there and, wait around and listen to the other speakers.
Terrific, Dr. Gary Ginsberg from the State Department of Health. Very appreciative of, again, your personal expertise, as well as Dr. Sokol, and all that you do for the state of New York. I want to thank our governor, investing over $4 billion in Clean Water Infrastructure Act, the Water Infrastructure Improvement Act, helping local governments with projects like water main line repairs, sewer pipe replacements, treatment plant upgrades. Absolutely fantastic effort by the state of New York, and also, again, a leader in PFAS detection. The state of New York receiving all of these water sampling from our municipal water suppliers, again, our public schools or all schools with a private water supply, reporting these tests to the Department of Health. And in conjunction with the Department of Health, we have the Department of Environmental Conservation. And with us here today is Martin Brand, the Deputy Commissioner for the Office of Remediation and Material Management, working closely with the Department of Health after defects are found, shifting the efforts to the Department of Environmental Conservation to try to identify that source, that point source of pollution. Martin, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Steve. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
All right, great. Well, thank you very much for the invitation to come and talk to you and your members today. While we're waiting for the slides to cycle through, go forward until you see the one with my smiling face. There we go. Thank you. First of all, I just want to thank a few folks. One, Steve, I want to thank you. Thank you for your leadership. The Associated Counties, you and I have worked on a number of very important environmental issues over the last couple of years, from PFAS, as you mentioned, us standing up at the summit in EPA a couple of years ago, to plastic bags and other issues. So thank you so much. And I also want to give a shout out to your membership as well. County governments and the county executives really have been providing tremendous leadership on the ground across the state as we go forward, as well as cities and small villages and individuals everywhere, and certainly the environmental advocates as well, people like Rob and Dharma, keep us focused, keep us moving, and provide that leadership on the ground. So I just want to thank all of you, and certainly our great partners in the Department of Health, Gary and his team, who we work with every single day, responding to the PFAS issues around the state. So thank you for that. We can go to the next slide, please. So thank you for Dharma and Rob for setting the stage in terms of PFAS. So I won't go into that, but certainly, as Rob mentioned, emerging contaminants are here. They're impacting water supplies and private drinking water wells around the state. Certainly the focus, early on with Hoosick Falls, Petersburg, Newburgh, and some places on Long Island. But as we move forward, obviously, we're finding situations and concerns around the state. So I'm going to go a little bit into New York State's actions as a whole, just kind of throughout a number of places where we're working on the ground and to combat these emerging contaminants. So next slide. So what does the action look like? Well, early on in places like Hoosick Falls and Petersburg, it kind of looks like this. It looked like a tremendous effort, sort of a military operation to respond to drinking water issues. We in Hoosick Falls, marshaled hundreds of employees from the DEC, many from volunteers from other programs not associated with normal water quality issues, to really get up there and provide clean drinking water to folks there as soon as we can. But certainly, in the wake of the contamination that we identified there, we've been taking actions statewide to really identify and where necessary mitigate impacts to drinking water supplies. So we've been looking at possible sources for PFAS and 1,4-dioxane and other emerging contaminants. We've been sampling water supplies and groundwater wells around suspected sources around the state. And as we did in Hoosick and other communities, we're continuing to provide alternate water supplies as necessary in order to protect public health. Next slide, please. So I say this around the state a lot. In the absence of federal leadership, our response has been immediate and extraordinary, and it truly has. This is not hyperbole coming from a state official. We really are, as several mentioned already today, that we're out in front of the nation in many areas. Right away in 2016, we were the first state to regulate PFOA and PFOS as hazardous substances, an action that we're still waiting for the federal government to take. That action really unlocked the significant resources of the state, including the state Superfund, in order to spend money and start to respond to these issues. The governor immediately established a water quality rapid response team, which was a combination of multiple state agencies to break down those silos, develop that coordination and communication between agencies, and really marshal the resources of the state to this problem. And as Gary noted, that the Drinking Water Quality Council was established early on as well to look at drinking water supplies and drinking water issues, and in particular look at things like standards for PFAS compounds. Next slide. I would note, Steve, you mentioned we were at the EPA summit in 2019, I guess it was. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of action that's taking place in the federal government, though there are glimmers of hope. There's some current legislation there, the PFAS Action Act, that's really being debated in Congress right now, which actually discusses designating at least the first couple of PFAS compounds as CERCLA hazardous substances, which, as you know, when we were down there at that summit a couple of years ago, we were advocating that along with a number of other states, because unlike New York, many states don't have the resources that we have. They don't have a well-established Superfund program. They really rely on the federal government and EPA to step up and take these actions. And without a national plan, without designation as hazardous substances, without national drinking water standards, it's really been up to the states to move forward on their own. So again, we remain vigilant to continue to push the federal government to take action. Gary mentioned the funding, and Rob mentioned the funding too. We really, early on in 2017 with the Clean Water Infrastructure Act, really received an extraordinary an amount of funding for water quality response. The governor and legislature stepped right up in 2017 and provided $2.5 billion for water quality, really across a broad range of water quality issues, both emerging contaminants and normal infrastructure. So Gary mentioned, WEA and the IMG grants and the WQIP grants, and certainly subsequent appropriations from the state legislature in the budget, has raised that initial investment of $2.5 billion to $5 billion, and certainly many of your members have been taking advantage of those grants and other communities across the state, whether it's responding to emerging contaminant issues or just working on the water infrastructure that's needed. So those grant gateways are up and running. They're populated with money, and I certainly encourage your members to investigate those sources of funding. But not only was the quantity of of funding extraordinary, really, but the scope of the Clean Water Infrastructure Act is quite stunning as well, because again, it covers the whole range from water infrastructure to things like land acquisition, source water protection, green infrastructure. Importantly for my programs, providing additional funding for remediation, drinking water response, solid waste landfill investigations, those type of things. So we've been very lucky there. Early on, after Hoosick Falls and then following Newburgh as well, we started taking a number of actions to determine the scope of the problem in New York and to sort of develop the universe of sites and response actions that we might need to take. In 2016, we started a survey of over 2,500 various entities around the state where emerging contaminants might have been used or might be currently present, things like airports, fire training centers, manufacturing facilities, military bases, and the like. That information was really used to focus our search in the beginning. So where we had positive responses for those entities, we mapped out drinking water supplies near those facilities, and working with Department of Health, immediately started actions to evaluate those water supplies for any potential impacts. And that work actually continues still. We continue to refine that survey and work on those facilities. And as you know, Steve, for your membership, the fire training centers in particular, and some of the emergency management facilities around the state really have been key areas to look for sources of PFAS through the firefighting foam. So we've been certainly working with a number of communities and counties around the state, as we investigate these sites. We initiated a program to go back and look at our legacy Superfund sites in a variety of categories. So both the traditional Superfund hazardous waste remediation sites and the brownfield sites as well. So we have gone back and we're looking at about 1,400 legacy sites, those that are either in active remediation programs or in operation maintenance, and we're resampling for PFAS and 1,4-dioxane. And where necessary, we're making corrections to remedial plans that are already in place, or refining our investigations to make sure we adequately identify any emerging contaminant issues. As part of the, if you just slide back, there you go. As part of the Clean Water Infrastructure Act of 2017, we got some additional authority through amendments to the Environmental Conservation Law to really allow us to look at former landfills. The amendments to what we call Title 12 of the ECL allowed us to use some of this money, including state Superfund money, to really characterize and prioritize landfills for sampling and really look at potential drinking water impacts. So we've been working on that quite vigorously. We looked at over 2,000 sort of pre-regulatory former landfills. These are inactive landfills located in communities around the state. We've been looking at groundwater, and in some cases where we identify groundwater issues at the landfill itself, but then we move out and look at public water supplies or private water supplies. So that work has been going on, and we recently posted on our webpage a report of those activities up through the end of 2020.
Sorry about that, Martin. Jeanette, we can see your screen there, so you have to, there you go. Thank you. Thank you.
No problem. I thought I was getting a message from somebody. So that work's been ongoing as well. So a lot of investigation work on the ground, and certainly, the main thing to keep in mind here is as we do these assessments, we're continuing to look at and mapping water supplies in close proximity to all these potential sources. And whenever we find an issue, we immediately respond. We work closely with the Department of Health to identify either public supplies or private water well users, and we provide alternate water supplies as quickly as we can. We continue to do that every week. We are working to provide alternate water supplies to people that have private wells that are impacted, whether it's bottled water, or the POET systems that go on the house or hooking up to the municipal water supply. Just a couple numbers. So part of this effort, we've sampled almost 1,300 sites so far and taken action in a number of locations. A number of these sites have been elevated to Superfund sites. They're of such significance, some of them landfills for the most part, that we've elevated 15 of those up to the what we call the Class 2 significant threat sites in the state Superfund. And we're looking at a number of potential sites as well. And we've provided alternate water supply to 1,300 private water supplies so far through the program, and we'll continue to do that as necessary. So very active on the ground, and again, thank you for the cooperation at the local level for that assistance. We can go to the next slide now. Thank you. We mentioned the MCLs. I won't go into that. I will mention a couple of other areas, just touch on where New York State is really taking some action. We have been doing watershed and source water assessments now for the last couple of years. Our Division of Water does this routinely, but we've really changed the focus a little bit to look at groundwater, public water supply systems and surface water supplies, and look at watershed and source water assessments. So there's a large activity going on there where we're sort of remapping, looking at potential source areas. In some cases, we're sampling watersheds to get again, to add to this database and this universe of PFAS concerns around the state. Rob mentioned some legislation and regulations to limit emerging contaminants in consumer products. I agree with him wholeheartedly. We need to continue to do proactive work to, cut this chain of contamination, if you will, to break the life cycle of PFAS use and other emerging contaminants. So he mentioned a few things. I will mention that last year we passed a rather important piece of legislation limiting the amount of 1,4-dioxane in household cleaning, personal care, and cosmetic products. I know this is the ABCs of PFAS, but 1,4-dioxane is something that kind of comes along with the process. And that law will establish maximum concentrations that are allowed in household cleaning, personal care products starting in 2022. So that's a very important piece of legislation, and we'll be working on regulations and the rules to implement that law and holding stakeholder meetings as we move forward. But we've certainly been active at the state level in terms of limiting PFAS in consumer products as well. Some of that through the Green New York Council and various executive orders from Governor Cuomo, including Executive Order 4, which sets specifications for products of all types in order to, one, lead by example, and also provide real environmental benefit at the state agency level to limit human exposure to certain contaminants, and certainly PFAS and some of the food packaging products has been part of that green procurement process as well. Rob also mentioned the restrictions on the use of PFAS-containing firefighting foam. Actually, some of those early regulations took place in 2017, which limited the amount of PFAS-containing foam that could actually be released into the environment, and also established storage and handling and other regulations for those things. We also had a companion program that we started in 2016, and we're continuing it, though it's slowed down a little bit, is that we offered to remove and dispose of PFAS-containing foam from fire departments and emergency agencies, and a number of communities took advantage of that program, and we removed some 40,000 gallons of PFAS-containing firefighting foam from storage facilities around the state. And like many communities, we're also we've commenced litigation against the manufacturers of AFFF, the firefighting foam, in order to really recoup the costs of all these response efforts, so the taxpayer is not, burdened by the cost of New York State's response actions. So that lawsuit is progressing along with a number of communities across the country in federal court right now. Next slide. And go to the next one, please. Are we stuck?
Jeanette, are you with us? We need to advance the slide, or Alexandra, I'm not sure if you can do it.
Okay, well, I'll charge ahead. The next slide, which is really my last one, is New York State actions next steps. So when the slides are made available after the meeting, you can take a look at this. But there's a number of things in the works to continue to move forward, continue to be proactive, and continue our response actions. One, in somewhat in concert with the establishment of the stringent MCLs that Gary mentioned, we'll be establishing soil cleanup objectives for PFOA and PFOS and perhaps other PFAS compounds in the near future. These soil cleanup objectives are what we use to determine remedial plans and programs under the Superfund program. So we'll be establishing those in our Part 375 regulations, and those regulations should be out for public review here in the near future. Again, a complementary effort to Department of Health's MCLs. We are working on ambient water quality standards and guidance values for PFOA and PFOS in groundwater and surface water. These are the standards that we use to guide things like discharge permits under the state SPEEDIES program. There we go. Thank you. So we're going to be working on those and starting a regulatory process there. As I've mentioned several times, we're going to continue to press the federal government to designate PFAS as hazardous substances and develop national drinking water standards and really take clear action, as well as providing some funding for the states, and also to continue to pressure the Department of Defense to step up and expedite their actions at sites that we have across New York State. I think Rob mentioned this a little bit as well, but we are certainly going to work with the Department of Health to look at the occurrence data, the data that we've been generating from our legacy Superfund site work and our inactive landfill studies, as well as the data that's coming in as part of the MCL promulgation rollout, the data that's coming from all the public water supplies around the state. Examine that occurrence data and see, where we need to go in terms of regulation of other PFAS substances. So we'll be taking a hard look at that and working with the OH on that. And we'll continue to, again, to work with agencies, academia, and everyone else out there. We have good partnerships around the state, whether it's with the Center for Clean Water Technology in SUNY or other groups that we work with, the Pollution Prevention Institute and others. I just want to mention Labella as well. We work with some of our consultants and industry leaders in treatment technologies. So we'll continue to do that. And of course, we'll keep assessing potential sources of contamination and respond accordingly. So that's what we've been doing in New York State. The last slide just has my contact information. And thank you very much.
Martin Brand from the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. Thank you very, very much. It looks like we're having a little technical problem on the slides, advancing them. I did want folks to see your email. So if we could advance it, I'm not sure. But I did want to say thank you, Martin, again, and myself and the Department of Health representatives did go to that United States EPA summit. And I would concur, Martin, I do not anticipate or expect the federal government to be moving as quick as we would like them to, certainly to designate PFOA and PFOS as hazardous substances under CERCLA, which would enable us to draw down more federal support for federal Superfund cleanup. Again, all efforts here are trying to avoid taxpayers being responsible for remediation, and those efforts, Senator Gillibrand, very aggressive on this in the United States Senate, as well as Congressman Maloney. in the Hudson Valley, and also Senator Schumer, of course, very active and very front and center focused on this. There we go. There's Martin Brand's email there at the Department of Environmental Conservation. Really appreciate, again, our partnership in local government and with the State Department of Health. Thank you. Charles Guter, next slide deck, Jeanette, if we could, from TRC Companies, the Senior Director, really a go-to company for me on PFAS remediation. When I come across PFAS hits in local governments, my first call is to Charles Guter, TRC Companies. Thank you, Charles.
Thanks, Stephen. I appreciate it. And I do appreciate all the conversations we have surrounding PFAS contamination, as well as other environmental issues. I'd really like to thank you for inviting us to this webinar. It's quite a panel of experts, and hopefully my presentation will be up to par. Thanks to EANY.
Alex, do you have sound?
Yes.
Yeah,
You have sound. Yep, I can hear Charles.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
I don't know what's going on.
We can hear you live.
Yeah, we can all hear you live. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Steve. I'd also like to thank the representatives from the DOH and DEC. I'd really like to echo what Mr. Brand said about New York State's response to their water quality issues. TRC is a nationwide company. I'm a New York-based engineer for TRC, but I'm involved in PFAS-related issues throughout the United States, and I can wholeheartedly agree with it sounds like somebody's not on mute. I can wholeheartedly agree with Mr. Brand's assertion that.
Yep, we're going to have to address this issue, Jeanette. Somehow we have to have you hang up.
Yes, I'm on the call.
I'm sorry, Charles.
That's all right, Steve. Let me know when you want me to start again.
Okay.
Nope. Sounds like we got it.
Thank you.
No. Anyway, to finish my thought, I work, I'm involved in PFAS issues throughout the United States, and New York State is definitely at the forefront of these issues, both on the regulatory side and also with dealing with it, on, I'll call it the finishing side, right? How do we make the drinking water potable once it's been impacted by PFAS? And that's the subject of my presentation today. It's going to be kind of go back to step one. Thank you. It's going to be focused more on brass tacks kind of discussions, like what does a municipality do? What does a potable water purveyor do? What do the county folks do when you have PFAS above standards? And it's going to be kind of a step-by-step what we've done in New York State, what we've done in other parts of the country that we found is kind of it's not terribly granular, but it provides an overview of the recommended steps to deal with the issue. So, you find you have PFAS in drinking water above standards. Many places in New York State have identified this because we're all sampling for it now. And what happens next? And first is the initial discussion. What do we do next? I know DOH and DEC go back to step one, please. Go back to the previous slide, please. Thank you. DEC and DOH are heavily involved and, help the municipalities, help the counties go through this. They get, immediately there might be a stop drinking water order. There might be, provision of potable water. But then we kind of get into brass tacks, like what is going on? Where are the exceedances? And in order to, understand what the issue is to treat the issue, please go back to step one. Thank you. You need to understand pretty much how the system is arranged. What's the well construction details? What's the production rate? Does the water supply does it provide water for 100 people or 10,000 people? all of these kind of things all of these data points are required to develop the remedial technology. Current historical water quality data, the facility plans, existing equipment arrangements, very important. The age and size of the pumps, and also, are there any existing schedules and plans for infrastructure or maintenance projects? Can we dovetail some of the remedial technologies or systems into those kind of maximize efficiency and minimize costs? Dr. Ginsberg brought up something very important earlier. Before we get into this, is there an alternative source that we can tap? Are 2 out of the 3 production wells, for example, contaminated, but 1 is not, and it's at a sufficient distance that we may be able to tap into that well? I know there are 2 municipalities we worked with in New York State that were able to do that to avoid a treatment of treated drinking water, and that's, it's kind of a holistic approach to, if we can avoid the installation of a system by an alternative source, that obviously is preferable to spending money. Next slide, please. Thank you. The most common option, and it was identified in Dr. Ginsberg's slide, is granulated activated carbon. It works. It's effective. It's done. It's acknowledged. It's proven. It's approved in New York State. We have used successfully ion exchange units in other states. However, it's not currently approved in New York State. However, we do understand that the DOH is overseeing 2 pilot tests of ion exchange systems in New York State. TRC, as an engineering firm, thinks for smaller type systems, it might be more cost effective and more efficient than a granulated activated carbon system. But the point is, there are options out there for treating the water. I mean, granulated activated carbon systems are, there's a host of companies out there that can partner with the municipality to install these type systems. But in order to do that, much like step 1, more information is needed. Flow rates, number of customers. Do we have existing treatment systems? Where's the water coming from? Is it surface water or groundwater? What's the quality of the water? Is there other things besides PFAS in the water that will affect the rate of granulated activated carbon consumption? And in order to, kind of vet all those things, you typically want to do a pilot test if you have the time, if there are unknowns that need to be vetted before you commit fully to a treatment concept. And then finally, when are we going to turn this thing off? Are we going to run it in perpetuity? We hope not. We hope we can identify the source of the PFAS, somehow isolate it or remove it, if possible, because ongoing treatment systems cost money. Next slide, please. Step 3 is the design, procurement, installation, and operations and maintenance. This is the core engineering tasks that are relatively straightforward. We always recommend streamlining procurement, and by that I do not mean circumventing any municipality's procurement system. What I mean is identify where the roadblocks might be in advance and try to mitigate them. I know that's not always possible, but anything, if you know where you're going to get tripped up, if you can identify them in advance and deal with them, that will help the system be procured and installed in a timely fashion. Are there public outreach requirements and commitments? Very important. Public needs to know what's going on. They're getting the letter that says their drinking water has been impacted. The effectiveness of the messaging that goes to the public is paramount in the success of the project. What is it going to cost? Obviously a huge issue. In order to identify funding, right? Maybe there's New York State funding that can be tapped in certain cases. You have to provide the cost for the system and how much, and then also the O&M costs. Where is it going to be located? Can you use your existing staff to provide O&M that you don't have to bring a specialized contractor in? Those affect funding sources or funding mechanisms. And then finally, verification, sampling, and analysis. how much, assuming we use GAC, how often do you have to change the carbon? Are we renting the system? How much is the O&M labor? Do we have to bring in labor, or can we use existing staff? These are all the things that have to be evaluated to understand what it's going to cost, the public water purveyor, county, municipality, et cetera, to deal with this issue. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm just going to go into a few slides of the different PFAS treatment technologies that are proven. I threw in one extra one that I personally like, but it's definitely not approved for use in New York State. But I'd like to talk about it anyway, briefly. Activated carbon, you can regenerate it's the proven technology. It works. You see the Calgon vessels there on your screen. It's any water engineer will be able to design and add onto your system using GAC. That is, if the system doesn't already have something like that. However, there are some downsides. It might be less effective for shorter chain PFAS compounds. That means you're going to have to put more vessels in line. Could get used up. GAC can get used up more depending on what's in the water. If there's other contaminants in the water, if the total organic carbon in the influent is high, it'll use up the carbon more quickly, which will require more funding to replace the carbon. Ion exchange resins. You may have to pre-treat before you go through ion exchange. There may be some brine disposal issues with that. It's not currently approved for potable water treatment. However, as I said before, there are 2 pilot tests underway in New York State that will hopefully prove out that technology so that it can be approved. And then there's finally surface active foam fractionation. That's a technology, not recently, but developed in Australia. We've seen some success of it throughout a couple of places in the United States. I like it. I think it's a pretty neat technology. I only mention it as in passing as another technology. And another one that's not on here is reverse osmosis, but similar to ion exchange and activated carbon, it will treat PFAS. Next slide, please. So, just to talk about Gac filtration of PFAS, as I said, it's a proven technology. Short chain absorb less readily than long chain. That means you may need more vessels to treat short chain PFAS compounds. And again, the efficiencies may be lessened by other contaminants in the influent water, which of course, if the GAC is being used up at a higher rate because of other contaminants, it's going to cost more money to replace, for the carbon changeouts. Seasonal, if it's a surface water body, you have to consider seasonal changes. And carbon, also it can be regenerated, for disposal, it has to be treated by incineration. Next slide, please. This is kind of a comparison of ion exchange resins to granulated activated carbon treatment. Basically, it says it shows rather what I've been saying is, the capacity of the GAC will deteriorate with increasing, the higher the Pfoa concentration is, but the resin capacity is largely constant over a wide range of concentration. That's why we like ion exchange, and that's why we're proving out that technology. Not us personally, but other firms are. Nice graphic of the, kind of what the Pfoa Pfos compound looks like, and how it's treated by each technology. Next slide, please. And I only threw this in just as another example. I mean, you not only, there are other technologies out there that are proven, not necessarily in New York State, but there are other remedial technologies out there. And as this issue becomes more and more mainstream, i.e., as we find it more and more in our drinking water, in our in our groundwater and our surface water and our wastewater, there will continue to be new technologies identified. The interesting thing about this one, it takes advantage of the PFAS tendency to fractionate in bubbles. So it's pretty neat. It's basically a big bubbler and skims off the foam fraction. There are downsides depending on the influent concentration. You could generate significant sludge. Next slide, please. So, Dan Warren was going to give this presentation. Unfortunately, he had another commitment, so I volunteered to step in. One final thought I'd like to, and I'll provide my contact information. I'll clean up the slides and send it to you guys. But one final thought I'd like to leave everyone with is it's very important to choose a partner correctly. And I'm not talking about a firm like TRC. I'm talking about a water quality treatment firm. And I speak from personal experience. We've been burned a few times. The more an issue is at the forefront as it's something new, the more you'll get folks popping up to try to take advantage of that, quite frankly. So it's really important to vet your water quality vendors well, so that you avoid problems. That is not on any of my slides, but I thought it's important to mention. And with that, I'm done. And I'd like to thank you very much, Mr. Aquara.
Okay, Charles, thanks so much, folks. Just give us about 10 more minutes. We'll wrap up maybe 5 minutes now, and we'll take another 5 minutes. We do have a few questions we want to get to. Just to close here, the attorneys that were to be with us today from Napoli Skolnick are really the state's experts on this. It's certainly a go-to firm that most of the local governments in New York State that have experienced detects of PFAS are engaging. As Martin said, the state of New York has filed for the firefighting foam detects on behalf of the state, trying to recoup costs. So too are the local governments when there's a PFAS detect. And if you need a contact, just feel free to give me a call and I will make the connection in your community. But PFAS and local governments, we're really hearing this come in, detects in soil, in groundwater, in surface water. We're also taking calls, the detects, as Martin mentioned, in landfills, around landfills. Again, drinking water, municipal water supplies, airports, both general aviation airports or commercial service airports where AFFF firefighting foam was mandated to be used on a repetitive basis pursuant to federal government FAA direction. We're also taking calls on wastewater treatment facilities. And again, as Martin mentioned, fire training centers. So PFAS, really what we're really focusing on now is the firefighting foam. It's mostly the detects that we're taking in local governments in New York. We've heard from the Department of Health and the Department of Environmental Conservation and from Rob and Dharma about the US EPA guidance on health advisories. We've heard that these toxins are very persistent in the environment. They're very resistant to environmental degradation processes. The CDC has said specifically that PFOS and PFOA are very persistent in the human body, eliminated extremely slowly with a half-life of nearly 2 to 10 years. And again, the causes of action here that Napoli and Skolnick and the state of New York has advanced is simply negligence claims here, public and private nuisance, trespass, defective product design, failure to warn, restitution, certainly for cost recovery of the damages of remediating the toxin in the environment. And as Martin said, these environmental remediation costs can be quite costly and take a long time for maintenance and monitoring of the remediation. Let's take a few questions, and I want to thank Napoli Skolnick again as well. Thank all our panelists today. Let's just take a couple of questions. One of the questions is, people are concerned about exposure from drinking water. Are there any sources of exposure? I'll leave that to our panelists. Any sources of exposure? People are concerned about exposure from drinking water. Other sources of exposure? Martin?
Well, if I understand the question, certainly Gary can weigh in here. Are you looking for other sources of exposure other than drinking water?
Yes.
Well, Rob touched on a little bit. I touched on a little bit. We have some concerns about potential PFAS exposures related to things like food packaging and other packaging, maybe clothing. Some items like that. We're not entirely sure, I guess, and maybe health should weigh in this on the extent of the risk to exposure for physical contact, but certainly ingestion to food packaging and all that. That's why we've been working with stakeholders across the state, both to get disclosure of PFAS and other emerging contaminants concentrations in consumer products. So looking for disclosure of contents for household cleaning products and laundry detergents and all that. And we certainly work in our green procurement programs to eliminate exposure, at least in the state agency level, and sort of, like you said, lead by example there to eliminate the use of some of these chemicals there. So I guess generally, yes, there are concerns about PFAS generally in the environment. Obviously, most of the work that we're doing at DEC that I described today is really focused on public and private drinking water supplies at this point, because that's the obvious primary exposure that we've identified. So maybe the health department can add to that.
Yeah, I'll add if I can. Stephen, can you hear me? This is
Yes.
Gary again.
Yes, we
Yeah,
can.
that one area that we've also been quite active with DEC on is evaluating levels, particularly of PFOS, but a variety of PFAS compounds in fish from local water bodies that, there is some bioaccumulation potential in fish. And so we do have a fish consumption advisory program across New York State, which is now increasingly focusing on PFAS. And where we can, we try to advise fishermen, anglers, and fisher families on, the healthiest fish to eat. And sometimes, the biggest fish have the highest levels of mercury or PCBs. Not always the case for the PFAS compounds, and so we're still learning about that lay of the land. But as Martin said, consumer products, the levels have continued to go down in what's available on the market today. Some retailers, as well as some state action, has led to lowering of levels. But there's more work to be done, and especially with some of the older products in people's homes, as they turn over the next 5-10 years, I think we'll continue to see the indoor environment levels go down.
Let me just take a couple of more questions here. I guess for the Department of Health, will the department be posting the testing results for schools and municipal water testing?
So what we have posted so far on our website are all the deferrals, and that's a program we didn't really talk much about, but those were early on in our testing process, exceedances of the MCLs, and those supplies that knew they were going to be in violation, they entered into a special program where they got a leg up and an early advance on testing and getting involved in compliance. We've posted all of the deferrals. We will be looking at the best way to make transparent the information that is coming to us in CIDWIS from schools, from large, medium, and small supplies, in getting the information on a time frame where we can confirm all the results, and where we're getting, where it's not just piecemeal information, but where we can provide an update that really has been well vetted, and we're still looking at the best ways to do that.
Okay.
Yes, that is our goal.
Okay. I know we've gone here about an hour and a half. I think we'll conclude. I'll just ask two last quick questions. Are there going to be different regulations and standards for drinking and surface water between Upstate and Long Island?
I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question?
I think the answer to that would be no, but I'll let you say that. Are there going to be different regulations and standards for drinking and surface water between Upstate and Long Island?
Not from the public supply perspective. I'm not quite sure I understand the question, but no, if it's a surface water that's used as a potable community source, no, clearly any type of source has to meet the MCLs. In terms of ambient water quality criteria and surface water protection, I don't know, Martin, do you want to, and it wouldn't be an upstate, downstate, or any part of the state difference in the way PFAS is approached, but I think, Martin, part of the question may be about ambient surface water quality criteria, perhaps?
Yeah, the short answer is no. There wouldn't really be difference between upstate and downstate. The guidance values and standards and effluent limits and the like that are part of the ambient water quality standard program for DEC are kind of based on, in some cases, the receiving stream for a discharge or the use of the surface water body. So whether it's used for drinking water, whether it's for habitat protection, fish propagation, aquatic organisms, those kind of things. Those are the larger factors in terms of what a particular guidance value or ambient water quality standard would be, and what maybe an ultimate, say, a discharge limit under a state discharge permit would be all those factors: use, flow, habitat protection, those type of things. So the characteristics of the water body really drive it more than the location.
Okay, last question, Martin, for you, I guess, to end with, based on your earlier comments about the Clean Water Infrastructure Act, when will new applications for Water Infrastructure Improvement Act, the WIA program, start being accepted again?
Well, I could certainly provide you with some contact information on that. That's I don't know the ins and outs of the exact schedules, but I know there's been some recent funding released through some of those programs here this spring. There were a couple of announcements that came out of the governor's office about the availability of certain funds. So I would say to get onto those, either the EFC website or in some cases the DEC website and the Grants Gateway, and look and see what's currently available out there. So there was a little bit of a hold, I think, last year, kind of slowed down some of the grants programs, but my understanding that there's funding available for most of the programs that the CWIA covers. And I would circle back, have your grants folks or whatever circle back to the EFC or DEC pages and double check there. If you have any issues or you need specific context, certainly anyone listening in could feel free to send me an email, and I'll line you up with the right people.
Okay.
And Stephen, we are working with water supplies across New York State that are finding they're in violation now to help identify funding sources from what is currently available through Drinking Water Revolving Loan and Water Infrastructure Act monies. So we are, also a resource for operators through our Bureau of Water Supply Protection.
Okay, I want to thank our panelists. We are out of time, unfortunately. We could talk for several hours on this, and I imagine we will be talking for quite some time to come. I want to thank everybody. This will conclude today's webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right.